Imagine this. You wake up one morning and everything is different. Your body has changed overnight. You can feel things you've never felt before. A tingling at the back of your skull that whispers danger before your brain can even process the threat. Your hands are stronger. Your reflexes are impossibly fast. You jump, and instead of coming back down the way gravity intended, you just keep going. Higher and higher, until the city is spread out beneath you like a map, like something you've only ever seen from an airplane window, and for one single, breathtaking moment, you feel free. Now imagine that the very first time you chose not to use that power, the first time you decided it wasn't your problem, that someone else would handle it, that you'd earned a little selfishness. The consequences of that choice killed the person you loved most in this entire world. That's not a superhero fantasy. That's a tragedy. And that is what Sam Raimi's Spider-Man is really about. Not the web-slinging. Not the radioactive spider. Not even the Green Goblin tearing through New York City in a jet-powered glider dropping pumpkin bombs on innocent people. Those are the spectacle. But underneath all of it, underneath every punch, every swing, every rooftop chase and costumed brawl, there's a story about a lonely, brilliant, heartbroken kid from Queens who learns the most painful lesson any human being can ever be taught. With great power comes great responsibility. You've heard that line 1,000 times. You've seen it on t-shirts and bumper stickers and coffee mugs. But in 2002, when audiences packed into theaters across America and heard it for the first time in this context, delivered quietly, with weight, with grief, it hit different. It hit like a gut punch wrapped in cellophane, and by the time the credits rolled, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Today, we are breaking down Spider-Man, the 2002 Sam Raimi original, from the very first frame to the very last. We're going scene by scene, character by character, theme by theme. We're talking about what makes this movie not just a good superhero film, but a genuinely great piece of American cinema. We're going to talk about Tobey Maguire, Willem Dafoe, Kirsten Dunst, and one of the most perfectly constructed villain arcs in blockbuster history. And yeah, we're going to talk about that scene. You know the one. So settle in. Grab your snacks. This is going to be a long one, and I promise you, every second is worth it. Let's swing. Section 2, Movie Overview, Context, Cast, and the Weight of Expectation. Before we dive into the story itself, let's set the stage. Because context matters. You cannot fully appreciate what Spider-Man accomplished in 2002 without understanding what the superhero movie landscape looked like before it arrived. The year is 2002. The superhero genre, as we know it today, does not exist. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is still 6 years away from being born. The closest things audiences had experienced to a serious, big-budget superhero film were Tim Burton's Batman from 1989 and its increasingly unhinged sequels, Bryan Singer's X-Men from 2000, which was good but deliberately restrained in its scope, and a string of forgettable mid-90s disasters like Batman and Robin, Steel, and the universally mocked Barbed Wire. The conventional wisdom in Hollywood at the time was that superhero movies were risky business. They were for kids. They were campy. They didn't make serious money, and they certainly weren't considered serious art. Then Columbia Pictures and Marvel Entertainment dropped Spider-Man on May 3, 2002, directed by Sam Raimi, the mad genius behind the Evil Dead trilogy and A Simple Plan, and everything changed. The film starred Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker, a decision that raised more than a few eyebrows at the time. Maguire was known for quiet, introspective performances in films like The Ice Storm and The Cider House Rules. He was not an action star. He was not a conventional leading man. He was, as one critic put it at the time, the kind of guy you'd expect to see in a coffee shop writing poetry, not fighting supervillains. But that, as it turned out, was exactly the point. Opposite him was Willem Dafoe's Norman Osborn, the brilliant but unstable industrialist who transforms into the Green Goblin, a role that Dafoe attacked with the kind of gleeful, unhinged intensity that only a classically trained stage actor can bring to a comic book villain. Kirsten Dunst played Mary Jane Watson, the girl next door in the most literal possible sense. James Franco appeared as Harry Osborn, Peter's best friend and Norman's son. And Cliff Robertson and Rosemary Harris delivered two of the most quietly powerful supporting performances in superhero movie history as Uncle Ben and Aunt May Parker. The film was directed by Sam Raimi, who brought his signature blend of operatic drama, kinetic camera work, and genuinely weird visual sensibility to a genre that desperately needed exactly that. The screenplay was written by David Cope, who had previously penned Jurassic Park and Mission Impossible, and the score was composed by Danny Elfman, the maestro who had already defined what superhero music could sound like with his iconic Batman theme for Tim Burton. The cultural context matters too. Spider-Man was released roughly 7 months after September 11, 2001. New York City was still raw. The wound was still open. The trailers for the film had famously featured a version of the web slinger catching a helicopter between the Twin Towers, footage that was pulled immediately after the attacks out of sensitivity. When the movie finally arrived, there was something deeply resonant about watching a story set in New York City, about an ordinary person who suddenly has the power to save people, who chooses to use that power to protect his city. The audience expectations at release were cautiously optimistic. Early tracking was strong. The buzz from test screenings was excellent. But nobody predicted what actually happened. Spider-Man made $114 million in its opening weekend. At the time, that was the biggest opening weekend in box office history. Full stop. It didn't just succeed. It obliterated every record in existence, and in doing so, it didn't just launch a franchise, it launched an era. The modern superhero blockbuster, as we know it today, was born in that opening weekend. But why? Why did it connect so profoundly? Let's find out, by going back to the beginning. Section 3, the full story breakdown, scene by scene, frame by frame. Act 1, the world before the bite. The movie opens with a shot of a spider web, intricate, geometric, impossibly beautiful, stretching across the frame. Peter Parker's voiceover kicks in, and immediately Raimi establishes the tone of this film. This is not an action movie pretending to have heart. This is a human story that happens to contain action. This is my gift, Peter tells us. My curse. Who am I? I'm Spider-Man. It's a deceptively simple opening. But Raimi is doing something really clever here. He's front-loading the emotional conclusion. He's telling you from the jump that this power is both a blessing and a burden. He's framing the entire film as a retrospective, Peter Parker looking back at how he got here. That choice immediately creates a kind of dramatic irony that permeates the whole movie. We know he becomes Spider-Man. We don't yet know what it cost him. We cut to Forest Hills, Queens, New York. The neighborhood is working class, lived in, genuine. Peter Parker, played by Tobey Maguire at 17 years old, slight and awkward and endearingly goofy, is sprinting to catch his school bus. He misses it. Of course he does. Because that is Peter Parker's entire existence in compressed form. He is perpetually, cosmically late. The universe is perpetually, cosmically against him. This opening sequence is crucial because Raimi spends a good 15 to 20 minutes establishing Peter Parker as a loser before he becomes a hero. And I don't mean that dismissively. I mean it in the most important, most empathetic way possible. Peter Parker is the kid who gets tripped in the hallway. The kid whose lunch gets knocked out of his hands. The kid who takes photographs for the school newspaper because that's the only way he can get close to anything beautiful without it flinching away from him. He is brilliant. We see this through his academic performance, his scientific curiosity, his ability to absorb and synthesize information at a level that should have landed him in MIT already. But brilliance without confidence, without social capital, without family money, in American high school culture, is worth approximately nothing. Then there is Mary Jane Watson. Kirsten Dunst plays MJ with a warmth and an ache that the role genuinely demands. She lives next door to Peter. She is the girl that the popular kids see when they look at her, but she is also the girl who has a difficult home life, a father who is harsh and dismissive, a future that feels uncertain. There's a complexity to MJ that the film only hints at in this first act but which pays off beautifully later. When Peter looks at her, he doesn't just see a pretty girl. He sees someone who understands what it means to feel invisible even when everyone is looking at you. His best friend is Harry Osborn, played by James Franco with exactly the right amount of oblivious privilege. Harry is rich, genuinely, absurdly rich, son of Norman Osborn, one of the most powerful industrialists in New York. But Harry is also, in his way, as lonely as Peter. His father barely acknowledges him. His friendship with Peter is the most genuine thing in his life. Franco plays this with a kind of effortless sweetness in these early scenes, and you believe completely that these two guys love each other. That foundation matters, because the film is going to spend a lot of time testing it. Norman Osborn is introduced early, and Willem Dafoe wastes absolutely no time in making an impression. He's giving a speech at a science expo, watching a demonstration, and there is something in the way Dafoe holds himself, that coiled, electric quality, that tells you immediately this man is operating on frequencies the rest of us can't access. He is brilliant and imperious and deeply, desperately insecure in ways that he has spent decades burying under layers of achievement and control. The Oscorp subplot running underneath Peter's high school story involves a defense contract worth billions, a performance-enhancing chemical formula that Norman has been developing for the military. The military is losing patience. The contract is in danger. Norman is being told by his board that if he can't deliver results, he's done. And Norman Osborn, being the kind of man he is, makes a decision that rational people simply do not make. He decides to test the formula on himself. But that comes slightly later. First, the spider. The class trip to Columbia University's biology lab. A genetically engineered super spider, one of 15, the guide tells them, and they must not touch the spiders, and of course one spider is already missing from its case. Peter is taking photographs of Mary Jane across the lab and not paying attention, and the spider, the one that is missing, the one that should not exist, the one that has been engineered with the DNA of multiple spider species, drops from the ceiling and bites him on the hand. The bite itself is almost casual. It's quick. It barely registers. Peter notices it, winces slightly, and then keeps moving. Raimi shoots it with almost no fanfare, which is the right choice. Because the fanfare comes later. The transformation is not instantaneous. It is slow, and disorienting, and frightening before it is anything else. That evening, Peter feels sick. His vision blurs. His head swims. He collapses into bed, and when he wakes the next morning, the morning of everything, his vision is crystal clear. His glasses, which he has worn his entire life, are no longer necessary. His body has changed overnight. The scrawny kid in the mirror is gone, replaced by something that doesn't quite look like him yet, something broader, stronger, more defined. He flexes his hand and the web shoots out and sticks to his alarm clock. He shakes it. The alarm clock comes with him. He stares at his hand. This is one of my favorite moments in the entire film. Tobey Maguire plays this beat. The moment Peter Parker discovers he can produce webbing, with exactly the right combination of terror and wonder. He doesn't immediately run outside and swing between skyscrapers. He hides his hand and goes to school. Because that is what a 17-year-old kid would actually do. He panics. He tries to act normal. He tries to get through the day. The cafeteria scene, and what it actually means. The cafeteria scene is when everything crystallizes. Peter's spider sense, that strange, prescient tingling at the base of his skull, fires for the first time when a lunch tray goes sliding across a wet floor toward Mary Jane. Without thinking, his hand shoots out and catches it. MJ turns around, startled. For a moment, just a moment, their eyes meet. Then Flash Thompson, the school bully, shoves Peter from behind and a fight breaks out. And here's where the movie makes a brilliant choice. Peter's new spider reflexes kick in, and he destroys Flash Thompson. He doesn't mean to. He can barely control what's happening. He catches Flash's punch without looking, he moves before his brain tells him to move, and when Flash finally swings at him, Peter instinctively dodges and Flash's fist hits a locker with a clang that sends the bully crumpling to the floor. The look on Tobey Maguire's face in this moment is perfect. It's not triumph. It's not satisfaction. It's something closer to horror, mixed with a terrible, shameful exhilaration. Peter Parker has spent his entire life being physically powerless, and now, suddenly, without preparation, he has power over the person who has tormented him. And he doesn't know what to do with it. He runs. Because that is also what Peter Parker would do. Uncle Ben, setting up the fall. Cliff Robertson plays Uncle Ben Parker with such quiet, lived-in grace that it almost doesn't seem like acting. Ben Parker is not a dramatic character. He doesn't have speeches. He doesn't have a big moment. He's just good. Genuinely, uncomplicatedly good, in the way that certain people in certain small lives are good. He tells Peter he's proud of him. He worries about him. He fixes things around the house and drives him to the library and tries, in the clumsy, earnest way of parents and parent figures, to understand what is happening in his kid's life. The conversation in the car is the one that matters. Peter is distracted, agitated, he's been thinking about his powers and his future and all the dizzying possibilities that have suddenly opened up in front of him. Ben tries to reach him. He talks about Peter's father, about responsibility, about the connection between having gifts and using them for others. And Peter, being 17 and overwhelmed and imperfect in exactly the way real teenagers are imperfect, doesn't really listen. He nods. He says what needs to be said. He gets out of the car. And that conversation, the one he barely paid attention to, is the one he will spend the rest of the film, possibly the rest of his life, replaying in his mind. The wrestling match. The decision that costs everything. Peter discovers, during his rapid experimentation with his new abilities, that he can do extraordinary things. He can climb walls. He can leap across rooftops. He can shoot webbing from glands that have appeared in his wrists. He is, in every meaningful sense, superhuman. And he decides to use these powers to make money. There is a local wrestling promotion offering $3,000 to anyone who can last 3 minutes in the ring with a professional wrestler called Bonesaw McGraw, played, in a gloriously campy cameo, by Randy Savage, the legend, the icon, the Macho Man himself. Peter sews himself a costume, a genuinely terrible costume, red with a web pattern and a mask that doesn't quite fit, and signs himself up under the name The Amazing Spider-Man. The wrestling sequence is one of the most purely fun sequences in the film. Raimi cranks up the energy. Danny Elfman's score goes full heroic spectacle. And Tobey Maguire, who reportedly did a lot of his own physical work in these scenes, moves like something that should not exist, fast and strange and bouncing off the walls in ways that no human being should be capable of doing. It is absolutely joyful. But the promoter stiffs him. The $3,000 becomes $300 because Spider-Man defeated Bonesaw too quickly, and the promoter, being the kind of person he is, simply decides he doesn't have to honor the agreement. He gives Peter a fraction of what was promised. Peter, hurt, angry, feeling the familiar sting of the world treating him as expendable, takes the money and turns to leave. And then someone robs the promoter. A thief comes sprinting through with the promoter's cash box, and the security guard asks Peter, who is right there, who could stop this man easily, to intervene. And Peter steps aside. He literally steps aside and lets the man run past. Because the promoter cheated him. Because it's not his problem. Because why should he? I missed the part where that's my problem, he says. It is the line that haunts the movie. It is the line that will define Peter Parker for the rest of his life. He says it casually, almost flip, and he means it in the moment. And then he walks out into the street, into the night air, counting his $300. And finds his Uncle Ben bleeding on the ground. The carjacker, the same man he let run past, has shot Ben Parker during an attempted robbery. And Ben is dying in the street, and Peter catches him as he falls, and he holds him while the life goes out of his eyes, and there is nothing he can do. All that power. All that speed and strength and reflexes. All of it, useless, because he chose not to use it 30 seconds ago. I have watched this scene many times. I have watched it with audiences, alone, with people who love this movie and people who are seeing it for the first time. And I have never seen anyone fail to feel it. Tobey Maguire does something extraordinary in this sequence. He doesn't play grief as a big dramatic expression. He plays it as collapse. As the structural failure of a person. His face crumples not outward but inward, and you watch Peter Parker disappear and something new, something harder and more determined and forever marked, take his place. The carjacker runs. Peter chases him. There is a warehouse rooftop, and a desperate fight, and a man who falls through a window to his death, and when Peter tears the mask off his face he sees, for just a moment, the man who did this. The man he could have stopped. The man who was running because Peter stepped aside. The rain comes down. And Peter Parker is never the same again. Act 2, The Birth of Spider-Man, and the Birth of the Goblin. Time passes. The film moves with a kind of elegant efficiency through Peter's early days as Spider-Man, the trial and error of web slinging, the improved suit, the gradual construction of a costumed identity. There's a wonderful montage quality to this section of the film, underscored by Danny Elfman's soaring main theme, that captures the pure joy of becoming something extraordinary set against the melancholy of why it became necessary. Peter gets a job at the Daily Bugle as a freelance photographer, specifically, the photographer who keeps getting shots of Spider-Man, because Peter Parker is Spider-Man and therefore has a distinct competitive advantage in this particular career niche. His editor is Jonah Jameson, played by J.K. Simmons in a performance that is, I will argue, one of the greatest scene-stealing supporting turns in the history of the genre. Jameson is loud, he is wrong about almost everything, he is aggressively, gleefully wrong and completely committed to being wrong, and J.K. Simmons plays him with the kind of volcanic comic energy that makes every single one of his scenes an absolute delight. Jameson has decided, through logic that makes sense only to him, that Spider-Man is a menace and a criminal and a public danger. He runs front-page headlines calling for Spider-Man's arrest. He is, of course, an idiot. But he is a committed idiot, and the film uses him brilliantly as both comic relief and as a commentary on the way media narratives can distort reality, a theme that remains, honestly, extremely relevant today. Meanwhile, in the story's other major thread, Norman Osborn's arc is accelerating toward catastrophe. The Oscorp formula, the performance enhancer Norman tested on himself, has worked. It has worked almost too well. Norman is stronger, faster, more capable. But the formula has also had an effect on his psychology, splitting his already fragile psyche into two distinct personalities. The rational, controlled Norman and something else, something dangerous and gleeful and completely unconstrained by conscience or consequence. The scene where Norman first discovers his alter ego is a genuine masterpiece of performance. Willem Dafoe is sitting at his desk, muttering to himself, and then he stops. He turns. He speaks to someone who is not there. And then, this is the moment, the camera shows us Norman looking at his own reflection, and the reflection looks back, and there is a conversation happening between two versions of the same man, and one of those versions is genuinely terrifying. Dafoe plays both sides of this with complete commitment and no self-consciousness. The Norman of this scene is courtly, educated, rational, appalled at what he's becoming. The Goblin is sardonic, cruel, entertained by everything. The two voices are distinct. The body language is distinct. It is a bravura piece of acting, and it sets up everything that follows. The Goblin emerges publicly for the first time at a military demonstration, a Oscorp airshow, when the board members who have been trying to force Norman out of his own company are present. He attacks them on his glider, dropping bombs, destroying everything, killing several people. And when Spider-Man arrives to intervene, their first meeting is electric, two extraordinary beings encountering each other for the first time, neither quite sure what the other is capable of. This first fight scene is choreographed and shot with a kinetic energy that Raimi clearly relished. The Goblin is fast, unpredictable, genuinely frightening, his mask's fixed grin giving him a horror movie quality that makes him uniquely unsettling in a way that other superhero villains rarely manage. And Spider-Man, still new to this, still learning, is clearly outmatched. He survives. But only just. What follows is a series of encounters that gradually escalate in intensity and personal stakes. The Goblin, Norman, in his Goblin persona, has identified Spider-Man as a figure of genuine interest. He respects the power. He wants an ally. And in one of the film's most thematically dense scenes, he approaches Spider-Man on a rooftop and makes a proposition. Join him. They are the same. They are superior. They should not waste their abilities playing at being ordinary, at pretending to care about people who will never understand them. It is, essentially, a seduction scene. And it is written and played beautifully. Because the Goblin is not entirely wrong, not from a certain coldly logical perspective. Peter Parker has been mistreated by ordinary people his entire life. He has been taken advantage of. He has been overlooked and dismissed and cheated. Why does he owe them anything? And Peter, to his enormous credit, says no. Because he knows, he has learned, at the highest possible price, what happens when you choose to look away from other people's suffering. He will not make that mistake again. Not ever. The World Unity Fair, escalation and consequence. The World Unity Fair scene is where the Goblin stops being a fascinating villain and becomes a genuinely horrifying one. He attacks a parade in broad daylight, in front of thousands of civilians, with zero hesitation or restraint. People are hurt. People die. It is chaotic and terrifying and spectacularly staged by Raimi, who has always had a gift for large-scale mayhem. But the most important thing that happens at the World Unity Fair is something that happens after the battle. Because Mary Jane is at the fair. She is nearly killed during the attack. Spider-Man saves her, catches her as she falls, swings her to safety, holds her in his arms high above the city. And for the first time, we see MJ look at Spider-Man not as a news story or an abstraction but as a person. A human being who is, and she can feel this, pressed against him, warm, and kind, and frightened on her behalf. The relationship between Peter and MJ in this film is one of the most genuinely romantic things in any superhero movie, and I say that fully aware of how high the bar for that comparison is. Raimi approaches it with a restraint and a tenderness that is not common in blockbusters of this scale. Peter loves MJ, has always loved MJ, with a kind of all-consuming, inarticulate devotion that only works in fiction but that all of us have felt echoes of at some point in our lives. He can't tell her who he is. He can't tell her how he feels. He can only show her, indirectly, through actions that she cannot connect to the boy next door she's known her entire life. The cost of the secret identity is one of the film's most quietly devastating through lines. Every time Peter gets close to MJ, something pulls him away. Every time he almost says the thing he needs to say, his phone rings or the police scanner crackles or his spider sense fires. He is perpetually on the verge of the life he wants and perpetually prevented from reaching it. It is a kind of torture, and Maguire plays it with such patient, aching longing that it becomes the emotional engine of the film. The rain alley scene, the upside-down kiss. And then comes one of the most iconic scenes in the history of cinema. I don't think that's hyperbole. I genuinely believe the upside-down rain kiss between Spider-Man and Mary Jane Watson is one of the indelible images of 21st century American film. MJ is walking home late at night when she is accosted by a group of muggers in a rain-soaked alley. Spider-Man drops from above, literally, upside down, suspended from his web, and dispatches the thugs with efficient, almost casual skill. And then he is hanging there in the rain, and MJ is looking at him, and something passes between them in that moment that bypasses language entirely. She reaches up and slowly peels back the lower half of his mask, just enough to reveal his mouth. And she kisses him. And he kisses her back. And the rain comes down, and Danny Elfman's theme swells, and Raimi holds on this image, this impossibly romantic, visually singular image, for just long enough. It is a scene that has been referenced, parodied, homaged, and imitated so many times in the years since that it is easy to forget how genuinely beautiful and strange and wonderful it is in context. In 2002, audiences gasped. I don't mean metaphorically. People literally gasped in theaters. MJ pulls away. She looks at the mask in her hands. She almost pulls it up further, almost sees his face, and then stops herself. Because some part of her knows, maybe, that she is not ready for that answer yet. She lets him go. And Spider-Man swings away into the New York night, soaking wet and in love, and you feel for this kid. You feel for him completely. The Goblin tightens the grip, personal attacks begin. But the film doesn't let us rest in that warm feeling for long. Because the Green Goblin has been watching. And the Goblin is smart, smarter than a lot of superhero film villains give credit for, and he has figured something out. He has figured out that Spider-Man has a weakness that has nothing to do with his physical capabilities. He has people he loves. The attack on Aunt May is one of the most genuinely frightening sequences in the movie. May Parker is at home, alone, praying by her bedside. Rosemary Harris playing this with such unaffected simplicity that it becomes quietly moving. When the goblin appears at her window. He doesn't hurt her. Not seriously. But he terrifies her. He violates the safety of her home, the sanctity of the one place that should be immune from the chaos of Peter's double life, and in doing so he sends a message. I know who you are. I know where you live. And the people you love are not safe. Peter finds Aunt May in the hospital. She's shaken, physically unhurt but psychologically shattered. She saw the monster, really saw it, in a way that leaves a mark. And Peter sits beside her bed and holds her hand, and Tobey Maguire plays this scene with such bottomless guilt and grief that it genuinely breaks your heart. Because he knows. He knows this is his fault. Not directly. He didn't invite the goblin into his world. But every choice he's made, every identity he's constructed, every relationship he's maintained while keeping this enormous secret, it all led here. The walls between Peter Parker's lives are collapsing, and the people inside those walls are getting hurt. Meanwhile, the Harry Osborn subplot is quietly building towards something important. Harry has been dating MJ, a fact that is quietly devastating for Peter, who can say nothing about his feelings. Norman, during one of his more lucid periods, meets MJ and observes her carefully. He can see that she and Harry are not truly in love, can see that she is drawn to someone else, someone she can't name. And Norman, who has begun to see Peter as the surrogate son that Harry has never been to him, makes a decision. He tells Peter that MJ is a heartbreaker and that she will hurt him. It is advice delivered with apparent kindness, but it is advice calculated to push Peter away from MJ, to isolate him further, because isolation makes people easier to control. Norman Osborn, even in his relatively rational state, is deeply manipulative. The film is careful about this. It shows us Norman being genuinely warm to Peter in these scenes, genuinely fond, and it makes you understand how this could be seductive. Peter is a kid who desperately wants a father figure, who has been without one his whole life, and here is this brilliant, successful man who seems to actually see him. Who respects his intelligence. Who treats him as an equal. The tragedy of Norman Osborn is that there is something genuine in his affection for Peter Parker. It exists alongside the madness and the manipulation and the violence. Real human beings are complex like that. Real villains, the most frightening ones, are not pure evil. They are capable of love. They are just also capable of everything else. Act 3, The Bridge, The Choice, and the Cost. The third act of Spider-Man opens with one of the most structurally elegant scenes in the film. The Goblin has decided that if Spider-Man will not join him, Spider-Man must be destroyed. But he has also understood something important: direct force hasn't worked. Spider-Man is too capable, too determined, too committed to fighting back. So instead, the Goblin decides to attack the thing Spider-Man fights for. The Queensboro Bridge scene is the film's set-piece climax, and it is extraordinary. The Goblin arrives with two things: Mary Jane, dangling unconscious from the bridge, and a gondola full of children, park visitors, screaming, terrified, hanging above the river far below. He gives Spider-Man a choice. Save the girl. Or save the kids. This is what you get for trying to be something you're not, the Goblin tells him. This is the villain's thesis statement, his philosophical challenge. He genuinely believes that Spider-Man, by choosing to protect ordinary people, is betraying his own exceptional nature. He wants to prove that the choice is impossible. That love is weakness. That caring for others will always be your destruction. And Spider-Man refuses the premise entirely. He saves both. Not easily, not cleanly. He struggles, he strains, he nearly loses both. The sequence is physically and emotionally exhausting to watch, and that is entirely intentional. Raimi wants you to feel the weight of this. He wants you to feel every foot-pound of force in those weblines, every second of terror as the gondola descends toward the water. But what makes the scene truly remarkable is what happens partway through. When Spider-Man is struggling, when the crowds below can see what's happening, ordinary people on a bridge, construction workers, strangers with no powers and no special abilities, start throwing things up at the goblin to help. They shout encouragement. They do whatever small, powerless, human thing they can do to help. "He's one of us," someone shouts. It is, without question, the movie's most emotionally direct statement of theme. And it works because Raimi has earned it. He's spent 2 hours establishing that these ordinary people are worth protecting, that they're complicated and flawed and occasionally cruel but ultimately worth the sacrifice. And when they reciprocate, when they step up for Spider-Man the way he has stepped up for them, it feels genuinely, emotionally true. After he's secured Mary Jane and the children, the Goblin attacks Spider-Man in earnest. What follows is the most brutal physical confrontation in the film, a warehouse battle that is ugly and visceral and clearly painful for everyone involved. The Goblin beats Spider-Man badly. He uses his bombs and his razor weapons and his glider, and he is stronger and faster than anything Peter has faced before, and there is a moment, a real, genuine moment, when it seems like it might end here. But Peter is not fighting for himself. He is fighting for every single person in his life who is in danger as long as the Goblin draws breath. He fights through the punishment. He finds a source of strength that has nothing to do with radioactive spiders and everything to do with grief and love and the weight of a choice made in a hallway 6 months ago. He defeats the Goblin. The unmasking Peter? And this is where the film becomes genuinely heartbreaking. The Goblin is defeated. Spider-Man is standing over him, exhausted and bleeding. And Norman Osborn, Norman, not the Goblin, the real man beneath the mask, surfaces. The crazy light goes out of his eyes. He looks at the figure standing over him and his face changes. Something human returns to it. He calls Spider-Man back with his hand on the glider that has razor-edged weapons built in, which he's surreptitiously activated. He says, "Peter." He knows. He has figured it out. And in this moment, with his final breath, he is warning Peter, telling him not to tell Harry, "Please, don't tell Harry." There is guilt there, and shame, and something that might be love for a son he has treated poorly. And then the glider activates, and he cannot control it in time, and it kills him. Peter removes the Green Goblin mask. And what he sees is not a monster. What he sees is a middle-aged man, tired, broken, lonely, brilliant in ways that were never enough, who was destroyed by his own ambition and his own instability and a chemical formula he should never have touched. He carries the body home. Because it's the right thing to do. Even for this man. Even for the person who nearly killed everyone he loves. He carries the body home. Harry, the seed of what comes next. Harry Osborn finds his father's body in the arms of Spider-Man. He doesn't know what happened. He doesn't know about the Goblin. He doesn't know any of the truth. He knows only that Spider-Man brought his father's body home, and he extracts one thing from this moment. Hatred. James Franco plays this scene with a raw, silent fury that suggests depths the character hasn't been given room to show yet. His relationship with his father was complicated and painful and full of unmet longing. And now it will never be resolved, and the only outlet for that grief is the costumed figure who he holds responsible. "Spider-Man killed my father," Harry says. And Peter, standing right there, Peter Parker, his best friend, the person who knows exactly what happened and why, says nothing. He cannot. Telling Harry the truth would mean revealing everything. It would mean explaining that Norman Osborn was the Green Goblin, that he terrorized the city, that he attacked Aunt May and nearly killed MJ and dropped children off a bridge. It would mean destroying whatever memory Harry has of his father that isn't already painful. Peter chooses silence. And it will cost him. It will cost him more than he knows. The ending, and why it's perfect. Mary Jane has figured something out. In the weeks following the Queensborough Bridge, she has been turning something over in her mind, a feeling she can't quite name. A memory of a voice she knows. A pair of lips she'd kissed in the rain. And she comes to Peter Parker's door and she tells him that she loves him. Not Spider-Man. Him. Peter Parker. She knows. And Peter, who has loved her his entire life, who has ached for this moment with every part of himself, says no. He says, "I can't." It is one of the most quietly devastating moments in any superhero film. Not because it's sad, although it is profoundly sad. But because it is right. Because Peter has learned, at the cost of everything, what happens when the people he loves are known to be the people he loves. They become targets. They get hurt. Uncle Ben is dead. Aunt May is still sleeping with the lights on. He will not do that to MJ. I will always be your friend, he tells her. And she cries. And he walks away. And the camera pulls back and up, and Tobey Maguire is small on the screen and alone, and the city is vast around him, and Danny Elfman's theme rises, and Peter Parker runs and leaps and swings out over the rooftops of New York. Not because he's happy. Not because this is a triumphant ending in the traditional sense. But because this is his life now. This is the choice he's made. This is the responsibility he has accepted. He swings. The screen goes to black. Section 4, Character and Performance Analysis, Going Deep. Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker. Let's be honest about something. When they announced Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man, a significant portion of the internet lost its collective mind. He was too soft, they said. Too quiet. Too indie. He didn't look like a superhero. He looked like a guy who'd cry at a Hallmark commercial. They were right about all of that. And all of that was exactly why he was perfect. Sam Raimi understood something that a lot of superhero casting directors miss. The secret identity has to be convincing. We have to believe, genuinely believe, that no one would look at Peter Parker and think that guy is Spider-Man. And Tobey Maguire, with his slight frame and his soft eyes and his quality of barely contained vulnerability, sells that completely. He is the most convincing nerd in superhero cinema history, not because he plays nerdiness as a performance but because he simply is the kind of person Peter Parker needs to be. But here's what people underestimate about Maguire's performance, the physicality. The scenes where he is Spider-Man require a completely different physical vocabulary. The movement is fluid and strange and almost alien. And Maguire transitions between Peter Parker's hunched, apologetic posture and Spider-Man's loose, confident movement with a completeness that makes the transformation feel real. His emotional range in this film is genuinely impressive. The quiet crush on MJ, the love for his aunt and uncle. The horror of Ben's death. The determination of the bridge sequence. And the heartbreaking final scene, where he walks away from the thing he wants most because loving it would put it in danger. Every register is calibrated perfectly. Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin. Willem Dafoe has been doing interesting, dangerous, unpredictable work in American film for 30 years. He is not an actor who phones anything in. He is not an actor who coasts on charm or physicality. He is an actor who goes into the deep water of every role and comes back with something that surprises you. Norman Osborn is a complex character on paper, the loving but distant father, the brilliant but compromised scientist, the man whose best qualities and worst impulses have been chemically amplified and split into competing personalities, and Dafoe plays every layer. The board meeting scenes, where Norman is at once confident and visibly threatened, establish his psychology before the formula ever enters the picture. You understand why Norman is fragile before you see it. Which makes the fall much more affecting. The Goblin persona is where Dafoe's theatrical training becomes his greatest asset. He is not constrained by the conventions of naturalism. He commits fully to the madness, to the grandiosity, to the theatrical villainy, and it works because it never feels unmoored from the humanity established in the Norman scenes. The Goblin is not a different character. He is Norman Osborn without his filters. And that is genuinely terrifying. The scene where Norman and the Goblin have their internal dialogue in front of the mirror is the performance highlight of the film, perhaps of Dafoe's career in blockbuster cinema. He is playing both sides of a schizophrenic break, and he makes them both real, and watching him find the visual and physical distinctions between them without losing the connecting tissue is extraordinary. Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane Watson. Kirsten Dunst was, at the time of this film's release, perhaps the most underrated element in it. Critical discourse focused heavily on Maguire and Dafoe, and Dunst's MJ was often described in purely functional terms: the love interest, the damsel, the MacGuffin in a red dress. But that reading is lazy, and it misses what Dunst is actually doing. Mary Jane Watson in this film is written as a complicated young woman navigating a difficult life with grace and humor and a stubborn optimism that is specifically the optimism of someone who has had to manufacture it from necessity rather than privilege. Her home life is difficult. Her dreams of becoming an actress are real but precarious. And her feelings for the two Spider-Men in her life, the masked hero she kisses in an alley and the awkward neighbor she's always half seen, are more emotionally sophisticated than they first appear. Dunst plays MJ with a warmth that is specifically feminine and specifically working class, and she grounds every scene she's in with an emotional truthfulness that the film genuinely needs. The final scene, where she says the thing out loud, "I'm in love with you," and he says no, is devastating in large part because of what Dunst brings to it. Her MJ is not fragile. She is hurt. Those are different things. James Franco as Harry Osborn. Franco doesn't have a lot to do in this film. Harry is secondary to Peter's story in this installment, but he does it well. His Harry is genuinely warm, genuinely fond of Peter, and genuinely damaged by his relationship with his father in ways that he has no vocabulary for. The seeds of what Harry will become are all here, planted quietly, waiting for a sequel to make them grow. Rosemary Harris and Cliff Robertson as May and Ben Parker. Possibly the most important supporting performances in the film, and both actors do something incredibly difficult. They make ordinary goodness feel real and earned rather than saccharine. Ben Parker is not a wise sage delivering philosophical pronouncements. He is a man who loves his family, worries about money, and tries to talk to his kid about the right things at the right times. May Parker is not comic relief. She is a woman of genuine faith and genuine strength who is frightened but not broken. The film only has them for its first act, but their presence is felt in every scene that follows. Because Peter is fighting for them. Not in the abstract. For those specific people, with their specific voices and their specific warmth. Section 5, Themes, Symbolism, and Subtext. Responsibility and the American Myth. The most obvious theme is the one stated explicitly: with great power comes great responsibility. But the film is doing something more interesting than simply illustrating a moral. It is asking a question: what does responsibility actually cost? The answer the film gives is extraordinary. It costs you the girl you love. It costs you the normal life you wanted. It costs you the chance to profit from your abilities in any of the ways you might otherwise have chosen. Peter Parker, by committing to his responsibility, becomes in many ways a lesser person in conventional American terms. He is perpetually broke. He is perpetually late. He fails classes, loses jobs, misses everything that matters to the people in his life who don't know why. This is not a naive film about the joys of being a hero. It is a film about the sacrifice that heroism actually requires. And that's why it resonated. Americans, post 9/11, were living with a very real awareness of what sacrifice looked like. The film caught something in the cultural moment, a need to see that sacrifice dramatized, honored, made meaningful. The dual identity as metaphor. The secret identity is one of the oldest conventions in superhero fiction, and Spider-Man uses it with unusual psychological depth. Peter Parker's double life is not simply a dramatic device. It is a metaphor for the fundamental human experience of being known versus being seen. Every person contains a version of themselves that they show the world, and a version that is more true, more capable, more complex than what they allow others to see. Every person has had the experience of wanting to be known fully and being afraid of what that would cost. The mask is not what makes Peter Parker extraordinary. The mask is what makes him relatable. The tragedy of the secret identity, as the film frames it, is that it is not primarily a practical necessity. It is also a form of protection from intimacy. Peter doesn't just hide his identity to protect his loved ones. He hides it because being truly known, being fully seen, is the most terrifying thing in his life. And in this, he is every person who has ever been afraid to be vulnerable. The father figure problem. The film is saturated with father figures, and none of them are uncomplicated. Ben Parker is the good father, the ideal, the standard Peter will measure everything against. He is murdered. Norman Osborn is the seductive false father, brilliant, affirming in specific ways, ultimately destructive. He too dies. Jonah Jameson is the punishing, impossible to please authority figure. He cannot be satisfied. Peter Parker is a young man moving through a world that has removed every paternal structure from his life, searching for guidance and finding only absence and inadequacy. His path to becoming Spider-Man is, in psychological terms, a process of learning to be his own father, to internalize Ben's lesson without needing Ben there to repeat it. New Yorker's character. Raimi makes an interesting choice in setting this film after 9/11 in spirit if not explicitly in narrative. New York City in this film is not a glamorous backdrop. It is a city of specific neighborhoods and specific working class textures: the subway, the bridge, the apartment buildings of Queens, the streets of Manhattan. It is a city that feels real in a way that many superhero films' cities do not. And the film gives New York City its moment. When ordinary New Yorkers throw things at the Green Goblin to help Spider-Man. When they shout that he is one of them. That moment is as much about New York as it is about Spider-Man, about the city's self-image as a place of collective toughness and solidarity, a place where strangers help each other. It landed. In 2002, 7 months after the worst day in the city's modern history, it landed like a catharsis. Section 6, Technical and Artistic Review. Sam Raimi's direction. Sam Raimi had made financially successful films before this, but Spider-Man was his first true blockbuster in scale. And he brought his entire eccentric sensibility to the table. Raimi is not a director who disappears into the material. You can feel him in every frame, the odd angles, the zooms that feel slightly too urgent, the handheld chaos of the fight sequences, the operatic swells of emotion in the quiet scenes. His signature Dutch angles, the tilted camera that suggests psychological instability, appear throughout the film, particularly in scenes involving Norman Osborn. It is a subtle but effective technique for visually flagging when the normal rules are being violated. Raimi also demonstrates an exceptional feel for the geography of action sequences. The bridge scene, the warehouse fight, the chase through Manhattan, you always know exactly where everyone is relative to everyone else. That sounds basic, but it is genuinely difficult to achieve and rare in action cinema. His biggest creative gamble is the tonal balance. Spider-Man is, at various points, a genuinely funny film, a deeply sad film, a straight-up horror film, the Goblin appearing at May's window, and an exhilarating action film. Maintaining coherence across all those registers without any of them deflating the others is a directorial achievement that often goes unrecognized. Danny Elfman's score. Danny Elfman's main theme for Spider-Man is one of the great superhero themes in cinema history, and I will not be moved on this position. It is soaring without being bombastic, heroic without being simple, and it carries within it a strain of something almost melancholy, a wistfulness that perfectly captures who Peter Parker is. Elfman uses orchestral language throughout the film with sophisticated precision. The Goblin material has a chaotic, almost circus-like quality that suggests a mind that has come and more. The romantic scenes with MJ are scored with a gentleness and restraint that makes the emotion more powerful rather than less. And the action sequences have a rhythmic drive that complements rather than fights the kinetic editing. The score won no major awards that year, which is a crime. Cinematography, Don Burgess. The look of this film is often overlooked in discussions of its merits. Don Burgess, who had shot Contact and What Lies Beneath, makes sophisticated choices throughout. The early Queens scenes are warm, golden toned, lived in. As the Green Goblin's influence grows, the palette cools. Shadows get sharper. The visual grammar of the film subtly shifts to reflect Peter's increasingly compromised emotional state. The web-swinging sequences were a genuine technical challenge in 2002, the CGI was not at the level it is today, and critics correctly noted some awkwardness in the digitally rendered Spider-Man during these scenes. But the best of the swinging sequences, particularly the first time Peter lets go and commits fully to swinging between buildings, achieves something that transcends their technical limitations. The sense of freedom. The sense of altitude and velocity and weightlessness. They feel right in a way that sometimes matters more than photorealism. Editing, Bob Murawski and Arthur Coburn. The film's editing is clean and confident, generally allowing scenes to breathe while maintaining pace across its 2-hour runtime. The action sequences are edited with a clarity that was somewhat unusual in 2002, before the era of hyperactive, incomprehensible cutting that would dominate mid-2000s blockbusters. You can follow the spatial logic of every fight. Every punch and dodge and web shot is legible. The film does occasionally feel slightly rushed in its middle section. There are elements of Peter's early Spider-Man career that could have been given more room to develop. But this is a minor complaint against an otherwise well-paced final cut. Section 7, Critical Review and Comparisons. What the film gets absolutely right. The character work. Full stop. No qualification. Spider-Man is, at its core, a film about people, specific, well-drawn, emotionally coherent people, and every decision the film makes serves that character work. The spectacle is in service of the story, not the other way around. This is rarer than it should be. The villain. Norman Osborn / Green Goblin remains one of the best villains in the genre. He has a comprehensible motivation. He has a genuine philosophy, misguided and self-serving, but internally consistent. He has a personal connection to the hero that makes every encounter emotionally charged. And he is played by one of the best actors of his generation with complete commitment and zero condescension. The emotional honesty. The film does not flinch from the consequences of its story. Uncle Ben dies and stays dead. The ending is not triumphant in any conventional sense. Peter Parker does not get the girl. Responsibility is shown to be genuinely costly. These choices take courage in a commercial blockbuster aimed at mass audiences. The New York authenticity. This is a film that feels like New York, not the glamorized, tourist brochure New York of many films, but the working class, outer borough, slightly worn New York that most New Yorkers actually inhabit. Where the film shows its age. The CGI, particularly in the web-swinging sequences, has not aged well. The digitally rendered Spider-Man moves with a weightlessness that sometimes pushes against believability, and compared to modern visual effects work, it is noticeably dated. This is not a criticism of the filmmakers. They were working at the frontier of what was possible, but it is impossible to watch in 2024 without noting. Mary Jane, despite Dunst's committed performance, is not given enough of her own story. The film needs her primarily as an object of Peter's desire and the Goblin's leverage, and while Dunst does everything she can with the material, there are moments when MJ feels like a plot function rather than a fully realized character. The later films in the trilogy would struggle with this more severely, but the seeds of the problem are visible here. The Harry Osborn subplot feels slightly underserved. Franco is good, and the groundwork for his future arc is intelligently laid, but in the context of this single film, Harry's grief at the ending feels slightly abstract. We haven't spent enough time with his relationship with Norman for the loss to fully land. Comparing Spider-Man to its contemporaries and successors. In 2002, the obvious comparison was to Bryan Singer's X-Men, 2000, which had similar ambitions, a serious, emotionally grounded superhero film, but which achieved them with somewhat more restraint and less spectacle. Spider-Man is warmer, more emotionally operatic, more willing to be earnest in ways that X-Men carefully avoids. The film also invites comparison to Tim Burton's Batman, 1989, which is perhaps its closest spiritual predecessor in terms of tonal ambition and auteur personality. Both films are the product of idiosyncratic directors given significant creative latitude on major studio productions. Both achieve something that transcends the genre's usual limitations. But where Burton's Batman is cool, expressionistic, and slightly detached, Raimi's Spider-Man is warm, melodramatic, and deeply invested in its characters' interior lives. In the context of everything that came after, the MCU, the Dark Knight trilogy, the Sony Spider-Man films, Spider-Man, Into the Spider-Verse, Raimi's original stands up remarkably well. Into the Spider-Verse is arguably the better Spider-Man film on purely artistic terms, but the Raimi original deserves enormous credit for proving that the character could sustain a major motion picture, and proving it in a way that felt genuinely new and genuinely human. The MCU's Tom Holland Spider-Man films are fun, and Holland is a terrific performer, But those films embed Peter Parker so deeply in the larger Avengers mythology that he sometimes feels more like an Avengers character than a Spider-Man character. Raimi's Peter Parker exists in his own world, answerable to no one but his conscience, and that isolation is part of what makes his story so powerful. Section 8, Final Verdict, What does it all mean? Spider-Man is a film about what we owe each other. Not in a philosophical, abstract, detached from reality sense. In a concrete, personal, costly, specific sense. What do you owe the stranger in the alley? What do you owe the city that made you? What do you owe the memory of the person who loved you and told you that gifts aren't yours to keep, they're yours to give? The film argues, without moralizing, without lecturing, through pure narrative and character, that we owe each other everything. That the choice to look away from suffering, to decide that it's not your problem, always has a cost. That cost might not come immediately. It might not come in the way you expect. But it comes. Peter Parker learns this through the worst possible experience. He learns it in a street in Queens with his uncle bleeding in his arms. And what he does with that lesson, the way he rebuilds himself around it, the way it becomes the foundation of everything he is the story of Spider-Man. This is not, in the final analysis, a movie about superpowers. It is a movie about character. About the slow, difficult, ongoing work of becoming the person you want to be, the person that the people you love believed you already were. It is a movie about grief and guilt and the strange alchemy by which both can be transformed into purpose. It is a movie about New York, and about America in the first raw months after September 11th, and about the peculiarly American belief that one person, one ordinary person who happens to have extraordinary gifts, can make a difference, can stand between innocent people and the forces that want to hurt them. Can swing through the canyons of the city and be worth something. And it is, more than anything, a love story. A love story between Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson, yes, but also between Peter Parker and his city. Between Sam Raimi in the art form of the superhero film. Between a generation of audiences and the character they had grown up with in comics who was finally given the treatment he deserved on the movie screen. Final rating, 9 out of 10. I'm giving Spider-Man a 9 out of 10. The half point I'm withholding is for the dated CGI and the slightly underserved supporting characters, because intellectual honesty requires acknowledging limitations even in films you love. But make no mistake, this is one of the best superhero films ever made. It is one of the most emotionally honest blockbusters of the early 21st century. It is a film that accomplished something genuinely difficult. It made a generation of adults feel the same thing they felt when they first read about this character as kids. That mix of wonder and sadness and hope and responsibility. If you haven't seen it since it came out, watch it again. Watch it without the cultural context of everything that came after, without the MCU and the reboots and the multiverse and the Spider-Verse. Watch it as what it was in 2002, a movie about a lonely kid from Queens who got a second chance to be the person his uncle believed he could be. I think you'll find it holds up. More than holds up. I think you'll find it's pretty close to perfect. The legacy, what Spider-Man 2002 actually built. Before we close, let's take one final step back and appreciate the scale of what this film accomplished beyond its own story. Spider-Man grossed $821 million worldwide against a budget of approximately $139 million at the time. It was one of the most profitable films in Hollywood history. It launched a franchise that would run through 2 sequels and eventually be rebooted into the MCU, and then rebooted again and again, through animated films, video games, television series. But more than the money, and the money was staggering, Spider-Man changed the calculus of what a superhero film could be. Before May 2002, studios hedged. They half-committed. They gave superhero films modest budgets and modest ambitions and expected modest returns. After Spider-Man, everyone reached. The budgets went up. The ambitions went up. The creative talent willing to work in the genre went up. The cultural seriousness with which superhero films were regarded went up. Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins came 3 years later, and it built on the foundation that Raimi laid here. The MCU, the most commercially successful franchise in film history, is a direct descendant of the gamble that Sony and Marvel took on Sam Raimi and Tobey Maguire and a kid from Queens. Every Spider-Man story that has been told since Miles Morales in Into the Spider-Verse, the Holland trilogy, even the affectionate nostalgia of No Way Home, exists because this film worked. Because Raimi believed in his vision, and Maguire committed to his character, and audiences came out in numbers that nobody had predicted. On that first weekend of May in 2002, they came out because they knew this story. They came out because they had always known it, because Peter Parker's story is, in some essential way, everyone's story. The story of realizing that your life is larger than yourself. That the thing you do when nobody's watching, the choice you make when it's inconvenient or costly or dangerous, is the truest expression of your character. That's the gift. That's the curse. That's the story. Who is he? He's Spider-Man. And more than 20 years later, we're still swinging. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, you are the kind of person who loves cinema the way I love cinema, with your whole self, with real investment, with a willingness to sit with a story until it tells you everything it has. Subscribe if you want more long-form breakdowns like this one. Drop a comment with your favorite moment from the 2002 Spider-Man. And until next time, look out for that spider.